Welcome back, fellow engineer. Continuing my mission against everything that flies and the general madness of energy balance, I came up with two mods you might either love or absolutely hate. You see, they can be seen as a noble step toward realism, or as a pure masochism, if the vanilla pain wasn't already enough for you. After my peaceful crusade failed spectacularly and commenters made it clear that Loud Wars alone won't stop anyone from building bloody flying heavy machinery, I devised a devilish plan to implant the common good by force, through limiting mods. The first attempt was surprisingly a success. Just tweaking the parameters of batteries and thrusters made the standard early game startup impossible. How? I'm glad you asked. Normally, once you set up a basic base, your next move is to build at least a mining ship. And that, my friend, is the very enemy I'm fighting. With this mod installed, it simply couldn't be done. A triumph. But then came harsh reality. It turns out that building your very first battery now required 1200 bloody battery cells, which is less fun, especially if you're unlucky enough to start with realistic inventory sizes. After several hours of gloriously torturing myself trying to build a simple base, I realized this mod would likely be disabled by any sane engineer within 15 minutes. So I graciously reduced the cell count for one large grid battery to more reasonable 200. Of course, to keep it realistic, all other battery parameters were scaled down too. That was a relief. The sun was shining again, the grass turned green. Until my old nemesis showed its ugly face. You see, if you abuse the batteries hard enough, it's still possible to build a bloody flying drill, or worse, a transport. And if you know anything about me by now, you already guessed, I couldn't let this shameful offense stand. As we've discussed before, the real problem with batteries is heat. So I did the only logical thing. I start building a heat management system for space engineers. And this was a turning point. You see, the space engineers have no clue about the temperature of blocks or even Earth's environment. And why does environmental temperature matters? I'll explain in a minute. So I wrapped my head around it and started with the battery temperature itself. However, as I quickly discovered, the temperature is not the thing on its own, it's the result of heat. Sounds obvious now, but it took me a bit to realize that what I really needed was to calculate a heat first and then convert it into a temperature. But how do you even do that? Well, let me introduce you to the concept of thermal capacity, the idea that every block can absorb a certain amount of heat before its temperature rises by 1 degree. Armed with this, I implemented what is probably the most realistic heat build-up system you can imagine. As we already know, batteries have a roughly 20% energy loss during charge and discharge cycles, so I simply converted that 20% into heat and applied it to the battery considering its thermal capacity. And of course, to give at least some way to observe what's going on, I added a little extra info to the block's terminal panel, along with a visual heating effect using the internal light. Its color and intensity change as the battery heats up. When the battery reaches 185 degrees Celsius, it just explodes. Pretty nice, especially if it happens in the middle of the battle. That turned out to be such an exciting experience, running in circles, rebuilding batteries, each one still requires 200 bloody battery cells. But wait, maybe, just maybe, there should be a way to cool them down. Of course there is, for example by dissolving the heat into the environment. But to do that properly, and when I say properly I mean realistically as always, I realized I'd need a few more things. Environmental temperature, atmosphere density, wind speed and exposed surface area. Calculating exposed surface wasn't a big deal. I had that part working in no time. Atmosphere density took a little longer though. You see, Space Engineers does have a parameter for it, but it's flat out wrong. For example, Mars shows as having 80% of Earth's atmospheric density, when in real life it's around 2%. So I decided to use oxygen level instead, which is 20%. Not perfect, but a whole lot better. Now for environmental temperature, that's where things got really interesting. To get it calculated properly, I needed a base temperature on a surface, an altitude multiplier, and a correction based on the sun position. Altitude, fortunately, is the only one of those that's actually easy to get. For the sun position, though, I had to pull out some proper mess. Dot products and other vector calculations to simulate a realistic day-night cycle. The actual surface temperature ended up being a formula based on a base temperature modified by sunlight intensity filtered through atmospheric density and influenced by weather effects. I'm not gonna go into full detail because if I do, you'll either get bored or worse, end up dangerously tempted to implement something similar yourself. I completely skipped wind speed here, mainly because Space Engineers calculates it based only on altitude, and I had already used that twice by then anyway. So, with all that madness hooked together, I'm finally ready to dissolve a bit of heat into the environment. And while it looked great, in practice it worked about as well as a pile of sorted garbage. Especially if your battery ended up jumped into a cluster of blocks, which narrowed its exposed surface to literally zero. Even batteries with just one side cover turned out to have almost no cooling effect. And on planets like Mars, the difference between day and night temperatures made things even worse. During the night, batteries would cool down slowly, but during the day, instead of dissolving heat, they actually absorbed it from the environment. That's when it hit me. All those heat sinks and radiators we see in real life? Yeah, they exist for a reason. And it was clearly time to apply that logic to the mod. So first things first, I implemented heat spreading to nearby blocks. It's limited to one block in each direction just to save your CPU cycles. The mechanism is relatively simple. Calculate the heat transfer using the temperature difference, subtract that from the source, and apply it to the target, taking into account the thermal capacities of both. Now the surrounding blocks act as a passive heat sinks, which was a good start. But would I stop there? Of course not! We need an active cooling as well. And that's when I remembered the idea of using flat thrusters to add a bit of style to ship design. So I thought, let's make that visual choice mean something. Thrusters now actively dissolve heat, and their efficiency depends on the amount of thrust they're producing at any given moment. Which means, yes, it now makes sense to keep them powered on and working if you want them to cool things down. Same with vents, except they don't need to be in a pressurized environment or even working in the usual sense. I just treat them as always spinning, passively cooling the surrounding blocks. Now, if at this point you're thinking you're crazy brainless bastard, welcome to the club. I couldn't agree more. I am exactly you think I am. But here we are, and if you're brave enough, I think you'll actually find these mods to be a lot of fun. You don't have to use both of them together, of course, but I do recommend it. Because vanilla batteries are incredibly powerful, it's going to be really hard to manage the heat they generate without some additional help. As a minor relief though, you're not going to suffer long. Enemies using batteries will overheat and blow themselves up too, becoming more of the resource drop than a threat. But You know what? It still doesn't matter. Because with these mods on board, you'll feel like the entire environment is out to get you. And Clank himself will descend from orbit to beat every last bit of sense out of you. In the end, I'm planning to merge all of my mods into a single world and record a full survival series showing what actual hated gameplay looks like. But before that, I need to finish a few more things. The next one will be hydrogen power, which I've been told is broken beyond repair. At the same time, I'll also cover nuclear energy using the same heat system we've built. Then I'd like to take a close look at inventory volume and finally remove that cursed fifth dimension from all the bloody containers. And last but not least, we have all those mechanical blocks that just work forever, without ever breaking. Sounds cozy and seems like a perfect thing to fix. If you're not scared of yet, join my Discord to get early updates on future mod progress. But be warned, it's a very small, very cursed community of old mad engineers just like me, who can demolish any idea in no time. And that's it for today. I'll see you in the next one, my brave fellow engineer.